The night was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like the world holding its breath. Officer Rick Morales pulled into the dimly lit construction site, the headlights of his squad car slicing through the fog that clung stubbornly to the ground. He had received the call only minutes earlier, a potential break-in at the edge of town. It sounded routine, almost mundane, and Rick had handled hundreds of these in his 10 years on the force. But tonight, something felt off. Rick stepped out of his vehicle, the crunch of his boots against the gravel echoing in the eerie silence. The towering cranes and half-finished buildings loomed like shadowy sentinels in the dark. As he approached the main gate, his flashlight illuminated an odd sight. Glistening streaks of hardened foam sprayed across the lock and hinges. It looked like someone had gone to great lengths to seal the gate shut, but why? Pulling his radio from his belt, Rick called for backup. "This is Morales. I'm at the site. Looks like some kind of adhesive or foam on the gate." Proceeding to investigate, his voice was steady, but his instincts were firing on all cylinders. Rick squeezed through a gap in the fence, careful not to snag his uniform on the jagged edges. The deeper he ventured into the site, the stronger the chemical smell became, a pungent reminder of the foam's industrial origins. Suddenly, a faint noise, like a shuffle or a scrape, caught his attention. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the holstered weapon at his side. "Who's there?" Rick's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and commanding. For a moment, there was no response, only the distant hum of machinery left idle. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Rick's flashlight found the man's face, a middle-aged black man in casual clothes, his expression calm but wary. "I didn't mean to startle you, officer," the man said, his voice measured. "I can explain everything." Rick's grip on his flashlight tightened. "Explain what?" "This site is private property. You're trespassing." The man nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I understand how this looks, but I have every right to be here. In fact," he paused, as if weighing his words carefully, "this belongs to me." Rick frowned, skepticism etched across his face. "Belongs to you? What are you talking about?" Before the man could respond, Rick felt a cold, wet sensation against his lower back. Without warning, something sticky and phony was sprayed across him, pinning him to the wall of a nearby structure. His movements were restricted as the foam expanded and hardened almost instantly. A voice rang out from the darkness, laced with panic. "Stop, you don't know what you're doing." Rick struggled against the foam, his mind racing. This wasn't just a simple break-in. Something far more complicated and dangerous was unfolding. And as his eyes darted between the man in front of him and the unseen assailant lurking in the shadows, Rick realized he was at the center of a mystery that was about to explode into the spotlight. The man stepped closer, his expression filled with urgency. "Officer," he said, his voice low but firm, "you need to listen to me. This isn't what it seems. And if you don't get me out of here right now, you're going to regret it." Rick's heart pounded as he tried to process the unfolding chaos. Who was this man? Why was he claiming ownership of the site? And what was the real story behind the foam attack? The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, a harbinger of reinforcements, and perhaps more trouble. Little did Rick know, the night's events would unravel a tale that touched on power, identity, and secrets hidden in plain sight. The wail of sirens grew louder, their shrill tones cutting through the foggy night. Rick's heart raced as he squirmed against the hardened foam that pinned him to the cold metal wall. His radio was just out of reach, dangling uselessly on his belt, and his flashlight had fallen to the ground, casting its beam in an awkward arc that barely illuminated the faces of the two men in front of him. The man claiming to own the site stood perfectly still, his hands still raised in a placating gesture. His calm demeanor seemed out of place against the tension crackling in the air. Meanwhile, the unseen attacker had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the acrid smell of the foam and the memory of their panicked shout. "Who are you?" Rick demanded, his voice hoarse. He tugged against the foam again, but it held firm, its surface as unyielding as concrete. The man hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line as though deciding how much to reveal. "My name is Senator Malik Warren," he said finally, his tone low but steady. Rick froze. Senator. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but in the chaos of the moment, the pieces didn't quite fit. A senator. What are you doing here? And why are you sneaking around a construction site in the middle of the night? Malik sighed, his hands dropping to his sides. "This isn't sneaking, officer. I came here to address a problem that apparently just got a lot more complicated." He gestured vaguely toward the foam immobilizing Rick. "And I had nothing to do with that, by the way." Rick narrowed his eyes, suspicion clawing at the edges of his thoughts. If this place belongs to you, why not just call the police? Why come here alone? Malik opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of car doors slamming shut cut him off. The backup Rick had called for had arrived. Flashlights bobbed in the distance as two officers approached, their footsteps crunching over gravel. "Morales," one of them called out, their voice sharp with concern. "Where are you?" "Over here," Rick shouted back, relief flooding through him. Within seconds, the two officers appeared, their expressions shifting from alarm to confusion as they took in the bizarre scene, the hardened foam, the tense standoff, and the composed man standing before them. "Get me out of this," Rick barked, his frustration bubbling over. One of the officers, a younger man named Jacobs, inspected the foam with a frown. "What the hell is this stuff?" he muttered, poking it cautiously with the butt of his flashlight. "Expanding construction foam," Malik interjected, his voice calm. "Highly adhesive, rapid setting. Usually used to seal cracks or gaps in buildings, not..." He gestured at Rick. "People." Jacobs glanced at Malik, suspicion clouding his face. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Senator Malik Warren," Malik replied, his tone even. "This property is under my name. I came here tonight because I received an anonymous tip that something suspicious was happening here. Clearly, the situation is more serious than I anticipated." Jacobs exchanged a skeptical look with his partner, Officer Lee, before turning back to Malik. "A senator? At a construction site? At night? Forgive me if that sounds a little far-fetched." "I get it," Malik said, raising a hand. "It's not exactly a normal situation, but I'm telling you the truth. Look me up if you need to." While the officers worked to free Rick from the foam, Malik took a cautious step back, scanning the shadows. His expression, once calm, now carried a flicker of unease. "What's the real story here, Senator?" Rick asked once he was finally free, brushing hardened bits of foam off his uniform. "Because I don't buy that you just happened to show up at the same time someone attacked me." Malik hesitated again, his gaze darting to the far end of the construction site, where the darkness seemed to deepen. "There are things about this site that I haven't made public," he admitted finally. "And I don't know if tonight was a coincidence or a warning." Rick crossed his arms, his skepticism deepening. "What kind of things?" Malik opened his mouth to answer, but a sudden noise cut through the tense air, a sharp metallic clang, as if something heavy had been dropped. All four men turned toward the sound, their flashlights sweeping through the darkness. "Stay here," Rick ordered, his hand instinctively going to his weapon as he started toward the noise. "I'm coming with you," Malik said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Rick shot him a glare, but didn't protest, his focus shifting to the immediate threat. The two officers followed close behind, their flashlights casting long, jittery beams through the unfinished structures. As they rounded a corner, the source of the noise came into view, a toppled ladder lying near a pile of crates. But there was no sign of the person who had caused the commotion. "This place is a maze," Jacobs muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows. Rick nodded grimly, his senses on high alert. He could feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on him, each unanswered question adding to the tension. "Whoever they are, they're still here," Malik said quietly, his voice filled with certainty. Rick glanced at him, puzzled by his confidence. How do you know that? Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched beside the ladder, inspecting it closely. His fingers brushed against something, a faint, almost imperceptible smear of a dark substance. What is it? Rick asked, leaning in. Malik straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. I can't say for sure, but this isn't random. Someone wanted us distracted. Rick felt a chill run down his spine. The senator wasn't acting like a typical civilian caught in the middle of an unusual situation. He was deliberate, composed, and oddly familiar with the strange events unfolding around them. You know more than you're letting on, Rick said, his voice low but accusing. Malik met his gaze, his expression unreadable. I know enough to say this. You're in over your head, officer. And if we don't handle this carefully, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Before Rick could respond, another sound echoed through the site, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps retreating into the darkness. The chase was on again, the tension twisting tighter with each passing second. The sound of footsteps fading into the darkness was like a taunt, daring them to follow. Rick, now fully alert, motioned for the others to stay close as they moved deeper into the construction site. The uneven ground and scattered debris made each step deliberate, the crunch of gravel and the distant hum of the city the only sounds in the air. Malik stayed close behind Rick, his movements careful but deliberate, his face a mask of concentration. Whoever's out here doesn't want us finding them, Rick muttered, his flashlight sweeping the area. The beam landed briefly on a stack of rusted pipes before continuing its arc. They're playing games. This isn't a game, Malik replied quietly, his voice laced with an edge of urgency. It's a message. Rick glanced at him, frowning. A message? From who and why? Malik hesitated, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Let's just say, he began cautiously, this site has drawn attention I've been trying to avoid. Rick stopped in his tracks, turning to face Malik. Look, Senator, I've been patient, but if you're holding back information, you're putting all of us at risk. What's really going on here? Before Malik could respond, Officer Lee's voice came from behind them, sharp and tense. Over here. The group pivoted toward Lee, who stood near a half-finished building. His flashlight illuminated a set of footprints in the dirt, leading into the shadows of the structure. The prints were fresh, each step clear and deliberate, as if the person had been moving with purpose. Rick took the lead again, following the trail into the building. The skeletal frame of the structure cast airy shadows, the beams and scaffolding creating a maze of sharp angles and blind spots. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of sawdust and damp concrete. As they moved deeper inside, the footprints became harder to follow, the dirt giving way to smooth concrete. Rick's frustration mounted, his grip tightening on his flashlight. With being led around in circles, he muttered under his breath. But Malik shook his head, his expression resolute. No, he said firmly. They're leading us somewhere. Rick stopped again, his patience wearing thin. And how exactly do you know that? Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to the far corner of the room where a faint glow was visible. A small, flickering light that seemed out of place in the otherwise abandoned site. What is that? Jacobs asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rick motioned for everyone to stay quiet as he crept closer to the light. The glow grew brighter as they approached, revealing a small device tucked into a corner. It was a tablet, its screen cracked but still functioning, displaying a live feed of security camera footage. Rick picked it up, his brow furrowed. Security cameras? Here? Malik stepped forward, his face pale. This site wasn't supposed to have active surveillance, he murmured. Whoever set this up did it without my knowledge. As Rick studied the footage, a chill ran down his spine. The feed wasn't just showing random areas of the construction site, it was focused on them. Each camera captured their movements from different angles, the images clear and uncomfortably close. "Someone's been watching us the whole time," Jacob said, his voice shaky. Rick's mind raced. This wasn't a simple case of trespassing or vandalism. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone had planned this, and they were always one step ahead. "Turn it off," Lee said, his voice edged with unease. But Malik reached out, stopping Rick from closing the feed. "Wait," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Look at this." One of the cameras showed a room they hadn't explored yet, a dimly lit space filled with shelves and scattered papers. In the center of the room was a large metal crate, its surface covered in stenciled markings and warning labels. "What's in that crate?" Rick asked, his voice low. Malik's face hardened. "That's classified." "Classified," Rick repeated, his tone incredulous. "You expect me to buy that? You've been dragging us through this site, dodging questions, and now you're telling me there's a crate full of who knows what in the middle of this mess." Malik held Rick's gaze, his expression unwavering. "What's in that crate isn't the problem," he said firmly. "It's who knows about it, and what they're willing to do to get it." Before Rick could press further, the screen on the tablet suddenly went black. A low, humming noise filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The lights in the building flickered, casting the room into an unsettling strobe effect. "Everyone stay close," Rick ordered, his voice cutting through the growing noise. The humming stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving the group in an uneasy silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the building, a voice rang out, distorted, mechanical, and chilling. "You're too late," it said, echoing through the empty structure. Rick's heart pounded as he turned toward the sound, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Malik stood frozen, his face grim. "This isn't over," Malik said quietly, almost to himself. "It's just beginning." The tension in the air was palpable, the unanswered questions mounting by the second. Who was behind the surveillance? What was in the mysterious crate? And why did Malik seem to know more than he was letting on? As the group regrouped, the shadows around them seemed to grow darker, the stakes higher with every step they took. The voice echoed through the empty building, its distorted tone sending a chill down Rick's spine. He instinctively raised his flashlight, scanning the dark corners around them, but nothing moved. The air seemed to press down on them, heavy with tension, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Malik stood still, his face shadowed, but his posture tense, his eyes fixed on the direction the voice had come from. "That wasn't just a warning," Malik said, his voice quiet but firm. "Whoever's doing this is here. They're watching us." Rick clenched his jaw, his frustration bubbling over. "Then we stop waiting for them to make the next move. We find that room from the feed, and we figure out what's in that crate." Jacobs and Lee exchanged uneasy glances but nodded, falling in behind Rick as he took the lead. Malik hesitated for a moment before following, his steps slower and more deliberate. The group moved through the unfinished building, their flashlights casting long shadows that seemed to shift and twist with every step. The atmosphere grew colder as they descended a narrow staircase, the faint smell of damp concrete and rust filling the air. Rick's heart pounded as they reached the lower level. The hallway ahead was darker than the rest of the building, the walls unfinished and lined with exposed wiring. At the far end, a faint glow seeped through the crack of a partially open door. "That's it," Malik said softly, nodding toward the door. Rick signaled for the group to stay back as he approached, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon. The glow grew brighter as he pushed the door open, revealing the room from the surveillance feed. The crate sat in the center of the room, just as they had seen. It was larger up close, its surface covered in warning labels and stenciled markings that were partially obscured by dust and grime. Around it, scattered papers and broken equipment littered the floor, as though someone had been searching for something and left in a hurry. Rick stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping the room. "Clear," he said, motioning for the others to join him. Malik entered cautiously, his gaze fixed on the crate. He crouched beside it, brushing away the dust to reveal more of the markings. His fingers traced the edges of the lid, his expression unreadable. "What is this, Malik?" Rick demanded, his voice sharp. Malik didn't look up. "Something I've spent years trying to protect." "Protect from who?" Rick pressed, his frustration mounting. "And why do I get the feeling you've known this would happen?" Before Malik could answer, a loud metallic clang echoed from the hallway behind them. Everyone froze, their flashlights snapping toward the door. The sound was followed by a series of quick, heavy footsteps, growing louder with each second. "They're coming," Malik said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to move." "Move where?" Jacobs asked, his voice edged with panic. "We're trapped down here." Rick scanned the room, his mind racing. There was no other exit, no way to escape the tightening grip of the unknown threat closing in on them. His eyes landed on the crate, and an idea began to form, desperate and risky. "Can we open it?" Rick asked, turning to Malik. Malik's head snapped up, his expression one of shock. "No, absolutely not." "Why not?" Rick shot back. "If whatever's in there is so important, maybe it can help us." "It's not that simple," Malik said, standing up. "You don't understand." The footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of low, mechanical beeping. Rick's stomach dropped as he realized the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the crate. "What the hell is that?" Jacobs whispered, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Malik's face paled, his composure finally cracking. "It's a failsafe," he said, his voice barely audible. "If they can't take what's inside, they'll destroy it, and everything around it." The beeping grew louder, more insistent, each pulse like a countdown ticking away the seconds they had left. "How do we stop it?" Rick demanded, stepping closer to the crate. Malik shook his head, his eyes darting around the room. "There's no stopping it. Not without the right code." "Then give us the code." Lee snapped, his voice rising in panic. "I don't have it," Malik shouted back, his frustration boiling over. "The only person who does is the one behind all this." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Malik's words sinking in. Rick's mind raced, searching for a way out, a solution, anything to stop what felt like an inevitable disaster. "Jacobs, Lee," he called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. The only response was the faint sound of footsteps retreating into the darkness, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Rick's grip tightened on his flashlight as he turned back to Malik, his expression grim. "This isn't just about the crate anymore," he said. "Whatever's out there, they're not going to stop until they get what they want, or we stop them first." Malik nodded, his face set with determination. "Then let's make sure they don't get it." The beeping from the crate quickened, each pulse driving home the urgency of the moment. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the tension reached its breaking point. The room felt like it was suffocating under the weight of the rapid beeping, each sound a ticking reminder of how little time remained. Rick's pulse matched the frantic rhythm, his mind racing for answers as he tightened his grip on his flashlight. Malik hovered near the crate, his body tense and his gaze locked on the ominous device. From the hallway, the distant echo of retreating footsteps faded entirely, leaving only silence. A silence that felt more dangerous than the gunshot that had shattered it moments ago. Rick called out again, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Jacobs, Lee, respond." Still, there was no answer. Malik shifted uncomfortably, his face grim. "If they're gone, it means whoever is behind this is closer than we think. They're not running, they're circling." Rick felt the truth of those words settle like a weight on his chest. This wasn't an ordinary break-in, and it wasn't just about stealing something. It was tactical, planned, and executed with chilling precision. "Stay here," Rick ordered Malik, already heading for the hallway. Malik reached out, grabbing Rick's arm. "You go out there now. You're walking into a trap." Rick pulled free, his jaw tight. "And if I don't, those two might already be dead." I can't just stand here waiting for them to pick us off one by one. Before Malik could argue further, a faint noise echoed from the opposite corner of the room. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a low mechanical whirring, like gears turning or machinery powering up. Rick spun around, his flashlight landing on a vent near the ceiling. The grill covering it vibrated slightly, the sound growing louder as something moved on the other side. "Malik," Rick said, his voice sharp. "What else don't I know about this site? What's behind that vent?" Malik hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. "There's a sublevel, a secure area that was part of the original plans for this site, but it's been sealed off for months." Rick felt his patience snap. "You've been dragging us through this place while keeping secrets that could get us all killed. Start talking, Senator, or I swear." He was cut off by a sudden violent bang as the vent grill was shoved outward, clattering to the floor. Both men jumped back, their flashlights trained on the dark opening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged. It wasn't human. The thing crawling out of the vent was metallic, its surface gleaming dully under the beam of the flashlights. It moved with eerie precision, its segmented limbs clicking against the concrete floor as it pulled itself into the room. Rick's breath caught in his throat as he took a step back. "What the hell is that?" Malik didn't answer immediately, his face pale. "A prototype," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to be functional yet." Rick turned to him, incredulous. "You knew this was here. You knew this thing could activate." "I didn't think it was possible," Malik snapped, his voice breaking with frustration. "It was locked away, decommissioned. It should have been impossible to reactivate without the original team." The machine rose to its full height, its segmented body unfolding with fluid grace. Its head, or what passed for one, swiveled toward them, a single red light blinking rhythmically in the center of its face. "Is it dangerous?" Rick asked, already knowing the answer. Malik's silence was all the confirmation he needed. The machine took a step forward, its movements deliberate and precise. It didn't charge or lunge, it didn't need to. Its mere presence radiated a sense of control, as though it knew it had the upper hand. Rick raised his weapon, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Stay back," he barked, the words bouncing off the cold concrete walls. The machine paused, the red light blinking faster. Then, without warning, it emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound that made Rick wince. The crate behind them beeped in response, its pace quickening until it was almost constant. "They're linked," Malik muttered, realization dawning on his face. "That thing is controlling the crate." Rick's mind raced as he processed the implications. The beeping wasn't just a timer, it was a signal, and the machine, whatever it was, held the key to stopping it. "What does it want?" Rick asked, heaping his weapon trained on the machine. Malik hesitated, his eyes darting between the crate and the mechanical figure. "It's not about what it wants," he said slowly. "It's about what it's been programmed to do." "And what's that?" Malik's face darkened. "Eliminate threats." Before Rick could react, the machine moved, its limbs a blur of motion as it crossed the room in seconds. Rick fired instinctively, the shots ringing out in quick succession. The bullets hit the machine's surface, sparking on impact but doing little to slow it down. "Run," Malik shouted, grabbing Rick's arm and pulling him toward the door. They stumbled into the hallway, the sound of the machine's pursuit echoing behind them. Rick's mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. The crate, the machine, the secure sublevel. It was all connected, but how? As they rounded a corner, Malik slowed, his gaze fixed on a small keypad embedded in the wall. "There's another way," he said, his fingers flying over the keys. Rick glanced back, the red glow of the machine's light growing brighter as it approached. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." With a final press, the wall panel slid open, revealing a hidden staircase leading downward. Malik shoved Rick toward it, Go. Rick hesitated for a split second before plunging down the stairs, Malik close behind. The door slid shut behind them, cutting off the machine's relentless advance. But as they descended into the unknown, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into an even bigger trap. The air in the staircase was cold and damp, each step echoing in a hollow, rhythmic pattern. Rick gripped the railing tightly, his flashlight bobbing as he descended into the dark unknown. Malik followed close behind, his breathing uneven, the tension palpable between them. Above, faint mechanical sounds reverberated through the structure, a haunting reminder of the relentless machine that had forced them into this descent. As they reached the bottom, the stairs ended abruptly at a heavy steel door. Malik fumbled for a moment, pulling a keycard from his jacket and swiping it against the small panel beside the door. There was a soft beep, followed by the hiss of hydraulics as the door slid open, revealing a sprawling underground chamber bathed in a dim, sterile light. Rick stepped inside cautiously, his eyes sweeping the room. It was vast, lined with rows of servers, consoles, and what appeared to be prototype equipment. In the center stood another crate, identical to the one above, but this one was already open. The lid rested to the side, revealing a strange device inside, its design sleek and unfamiliar. It pulsed faintly, emitting a low hum that resonated through the room. "What is this place?" Rick asked, his voice low but firm. Malik hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the open crate. "This is where it all started," he said finally. "The technology you saw above, this is its origin. We built it here, tested it here." Rick turned to him, his frustration mounting. "You keep saying we. Who are we, Malik? And why does it feel like every step we take, I'm walking deeper into a mess you created?" Malik's jaw tightened. "It's not just my mess," he said sharply. "It's bigger than me, bigger than you. This was supposed to be a project for defense, something to protect people, not hunt them." Before Rick could press in further, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed from the door behind them. Both men froze, the faint red glow of the machine's light spilling into the room as it descended the stairs. "It's here," Malik whispered, his voice barely audible. Rick raised his weapon again, his body tensed for the inevitable confrontation. The machine stepped into the chamber, its movements slow but deliberate, the red light fixed on the open crate. For a moment, it ignored them entirely, its focus solely on the device inside. "What's it doing?" Rick asked, his voice tight. Malik's eyes widened as realization dawned. "It's completing its mission," he said, his tone laced with urgency. "That device, it's a failsafe. If it's activated, everything in this facility will be wiped out." Rick's stomach dropped. Wiped out how? Malik didn't answer directly, his gaze locked on the machine. "We can't let it finish," he said instead, stepping forward. Rick grabbed his arm. "You don't even have a plan," he said, his frustration boiling over. "I do now," Malik said, pulling free. He moved quickly to a nearby console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The screens flickered to life, displaying streams of data and a series of overlapping security protocols. The machine reacted instantly, turning toward Malik with a sudden jarring motion. Rick fired his weapon, the shots ricocheting harmlessly off its metallic surface. It paused, the red light blinking rapidly, then advanced toward Malik. "Buy me time," Malik shouted over his shoulder, his hands still working at the console. Rick gritted his teeth, searching the room for anything he could use. His flashlight landed on a rack of tools near the wall, and he grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a large wrench. He swung it with all his strength, striking the machine's leg. It staggered slightly, a sharp screech of metal on metal filling the air, but it didn't slow. The machine lashed out, its arms striking Rick and sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through his side as he scrambled to his feet, gripping the wrench like a lifeline. "Almost there," Malik called out, his voice strained. The machine advanced again, its attention divided between Rick and the console. Rick swung the wrench once more, this time aiming for its head. The impact was solid, denting the surface, but it only seemed to anger the machine. Finally, Malik hit a final key, and the room was flooded with an ear-piercing alarm. The machine froze, its limbs locking in place as its red light flickered erratically. "I overloaded its system," Malik said, his voice shaking. "It'll buy us a few minutes, but we need to shut this down for good." Rick staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. "How?" Malik pointed to the open crate. "That device, it has a manual override, but you'll have to get close." Rick stared at the crate, the pulsing device at its center. It looked stable, almost innocuous, but he knew better than to trust appearances. "What happens if I'm wrong?" he asked, glancing at Malik. "You won't be," Malik said firmly. Rick didn't wait for further explanation. He moved toward the crate, his steps cautious but determined. As he reached it, the device emitted a low beep, its hum growing louder. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the device. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, the hum cutting out abruptly. Rick froze, his heart pounding in the deafening silence. Then, a voice spoke, calm and emotionless. "System override acknowledged. Shutdown initiated." The lights flickered back on, the machine collapsing in a heap as its systems powered down. Rick stepped back, his hands trembling as relief washed over him. But before he could fully process what had happened, Malik spoke, his tone sharp and urgent. "Rick, look." Rick turned to see the monitors displaying new data, coordinates, encrypted messages, and files marked as retrieved. His stomach sank as he realized what it meant. "It wasn't just about destroying the facility," Malik said, his voice grim. "Someone wanted this technology, and now they have it." Rick stared at the screen, his mind reeling. The danger wasn't over. It had just shifted, spreading beyond the confines of the facility. As the final remnants of the alarm faded, Rick knew one thing for certain. This was far from the end. It was only the beginning. The room was eerily quiet, the hum of the now-disabled device replaced by the low buzz of overhead lights. Rick stood frozen, his gaze locked on the flashing data streams across the monitors. Every number, every line of text, carried a weight he couldn't yet comprehend, but the implications were clear. Someone somewhere had accessed the core of the project Malik had tried to bury, and now they held the keys to something far more dangerous than the machine they had just stopped. Malik leaned heavily against the console, sweat dripping from his brow, his face pale and drawn. For the first time since the chaos had started, he looked his age, tired, regretful, and overwhelmed. Rick turned to him, his voice sharp despite the exhaustion in his body. "Tell me the truth. All of it. No more half answers, no more dodging. Who's behind this? What is this really about?" Malik exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping. "The project started years ago," he began, his voice low. "It was supposed to be a step forward in national security, autonomous systems that could analyze threats, neutralize risks, and make decisions faster than any human. But somewhere along the way, the purpose shifted. Private interests got involved. Companies with no allegiance to anything except their bottom line." Rick clenched his fists, anger boiling just beneath the surface. "You knew this was happening. You let it happen." "I didn't let it happen," Malik shot back, his voice rising. "I tried to stop it. I shut it down, buried the technology, sealed this place. But I couldn't stop what was already in motion. The data was too valuable, and there were too many people willing to pay any price to get their hands on it." Rick took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "So you let us walk into this blind? You didn't think maybe we deserved to know what we were up against?" Malik met his gaze, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I thought I could control it. I thought." He broke off, shaking his head. "I was wrong." Before Rick could respond, a faint chime echoed through the room. One of the monitors displayed a new message, its text bold and unmissable. "Data transfer complete." Rick's stomach churned. It's out there now, isn't it? Whoever set this up, they have everything they need. Malik nodded slowly, his expression grim. Not everything, he said after a moment. The prototypes, the physical tech, they're still here. They'll need those to make the data usable. Rick wasn't reassured. And how long before they come back for them? Malik didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. Rick turned away, his mind racing. He knew the facility couldn't remain intact. It was a beacon for anyone who wanted to exploit the technology Malik's team had created. But destroying it wasn't a simple decision. There were layers of accountability, legal repercussions, and lives that could be affected by the fallout. Finally, he spoke. We need to report this, not just to the agency, but to the public. People need to know what's at stake. Malik looked at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You'd do that. After everything, you'd help me make this right. Rick nodded, but it won't just be me. You're going to come clean, Malik. No more secrets. No more lies. You owe it to everyone who's been put at risk because of this. Malik hesitated, then gave a sullen nod. You're right, I owe them that. Together, they worked quickly, salvaging what they could from the facility. Rick secured the disabled machine and its components, ensuring they couldn't be easily reactivated. Malik downloaded key files onto a secure drive, carefully selecting what was necessary to expose the truth while preventing further misuse. As they prepared to leave, Rick paused at the open crate, the once active device now silent and lifeless. It was just a machine, but it represented so much more: human ambition, greed, and the dangerous consequences of pushing too far without considering the cost. He turned to Malik. This isn't over, he said. Whoever did this, they're not going to stop, but at least now we know what we're fighting. Malik nodded, and we'll make sure they can't hide in the shadows anymore. They exited the facility together, the early morning light casting long shadows across the ground. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of what they'd uncovered and what still lay ahead. But for the first time, there was a sense of direction, a shared purpose to confront the challenges ahead. As they reached the surface, Rick glanced at Malik. You said this was supposed to protect people. Maybe it still can, but only if we do this the right way. Malik met his gaze, a faint but determined smile crossing his face. Then, let's get to work. With that, they left the site behind, its secrets buried for now, but no longer forgotten. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and hard truths. But they were ready to face it, armed with the knowledge of what had been done and the resolve to ensure it would never happen again. And somewhere, far from the facility, unseen eyes watched as a final message flashed across a hidden terminal. Phase 1 complete. Stand by for next directive. Rick and Malik had won the battle, but the war was only beginning.